Why? Why do you want to be the governor of North Carolina?
I love North Carolina. Grew up here, and I believe in the promise of North Carolina, which is that if you work hard, where you come from should never limit how far you can go. And there are things that we can do to make that promise real for more people. Invest in our public schools, safe neighborhoods, build an economy that works for everyone, respect our personal freedoms, like a woman's right to choose. All of these issues are on the ballot this November. It's why I'm running.
Why are you the right person for the job?
I think I can do the job well. I've been Attorney General for the last 8 years now, and in that role, I have been fighting for the people of North Carolina and delivering, whether it was tackling the opioid and fentanyl crisis. It's devastated families, devastated communities all across North Carolina. We led the national bipartisan coalition of state attorneys general to take those big opioid drug companies to court, and we won more than $50 billion. Our state share, nearly $1.5 billion to help people who are struggling with addiction. We eliminated what had been the largest backlog of untested rape kits in the entire country, finally delivering justice to survivors, making our communities safer. So time and again, I've been fighting for people. I've been fighting to defend a woman's right to choose, fighting to defend our school kids' right to a sound basic education is guaranteed by our state constitution, fighting to defend people's right to vote.
Let's talk about your opponent. Certainly he's been in the news recently. What say you about that?
Yeah, the CNN story showed a despicable part of Mark Robinson's character. He called himself a Nazi, according to this story. He glorified slavery. He praised Hitler, all of which is absolutely disqualifying for any person who seeks an office of public trust, let alone the governorship. But here's the thing. Before that story broke, we knew he was singularly unfit to be governor. He says the most awful things about people. He says women are not called to lead, that they only have abortions because they can't keep their skirts down. He called public school teachers wicked, gay people filth. This summer, from a church pulpit, he yelled that some folks need killing. But it's not just what he says, it's what he would do. He wants to slash public school funding, firing 13,000 educators. He wants to eliminate early voting. He wants to completely ban abortion in North Carolina. We must deny him the governorship of this state.
We'll talk about some of those topics in a second. Let me just touch on this from the standpoint of the CNN story. Obviously, he denies it. Claims it's totally made up. Claims it's totally false. Obviously, I guess time will tell. What have you about that. From the standpoint of our judicial system, innocent until proven guilty, it doesn't sound like, from what you're saying, that you necessarily believe that.
No, I don't believe him. I believe that he was the one who made those posts. But my point is that it doesn't matter whether that story ever existed or not, whether that part was ever uncovered, because there are things on his Facebook page today that are there today that he posted that are disqualifying.
Let's talk about some topics. Abortion. You've already touched on it. Explain to me your stance on abortion.
Yeah, I support the Roe versus Wade framework, which empowers women to make their own health care decisions early in the pregnancy and imposes some restrictions later in the pregnancy unless the woman's life or health is at risk. The Republican General Assembly severely curtailed that right with their ban that they instituted last year. What is clear is that Mark Robinson wants a total ban. He wants no weeks, no exceptions. He says he'll go to 6 weeks first and then keep going down from there. That is wrong for the people of North Carolina. The decision for a woman whether to have a family, whether to have a baby, is perhaps the most personal decision a woman can make. She should be the one who makes that decision. The government, Mark Robinson, should not be the ones making that decision for her.
Certainly there are people on different sides of this debate or what have you. In regards to your situation, for the people, I guess, that would support your side, if you will, but have one specific question, and I'll ask it, which is, how many times does the woman have the right to choose? And let me be clear. I get pregnant, I have an abortion. I get pregnant again, I have an abortion. I get pregnant again, I have an abortion. At what point do we allow the woman to stop choosing, or do we continue to allow her, hypothetically, to use abortion as birth control.
Yeah, I've never encountered what you say in reality. Not saying that that hasn't occurred, but I'm not going to take away from all of the women of North Carolina their right to make their own healthcare decisions based on some hypothetical extreme example.
From the standpoint of public education, charter schools, religious schools, what say you about that?
Well, I believe in school choice. I believe parents should be able to choose the right school for their child. I'm a strong proponent of public schools. Went to public schools myself, my wife did, our kids did. We have incredible public schools in North Carolina that need to be better because the Republican legislature is defunding them, completely hollowing out our public schools, dropped us to 48th in the country in per pupil funding investment, which is a disgrace. We've got to do better by our schools. We've got to pay our teachers more so that we can recruit and retain the best. This summer, my wife talked to 4 of our friends. My kids are all early 20s, so kids leaving college. 4 teachers. 2 went to Virginia, 1 went to South Carolina, 1 went to Colorado because the kids couldn't justify staying in their home state to become an educator because we pay them such a terribly low salary. We can and must do better.
So when you say we can and must do better, what sort of salary are you looking at then that would be better? Let me start with that.
Well, we're toward the bottom. I would like to at least get to the national average. That's going to take some time because they've dropped us so far to the bottom. Here's what I do know. The idea that we're going to take $500 million out of public schools to give to taxpayer money, public money from public schools to unaccountable private schools and wealthy parents is absolutely going in the wrong direction. We need to be taking that money and investing in teacher salaries. And if we had done so, we could have made meaningful progress on giving teachers the pay raise that they deserve.
So where do you stand on charter schools when it comes to charter schools? And people, obviously parents or whatever, want to make decisions, public, charter, religion. What say you about that?
Yeah, I support charter schools as long as they're accountable. We need to make sure that if we're spending public dollars on schooling, that there's accountability so that we know what kind of return we're getting on that investment. My kids went to a magnet school here in Wake County. Fantastic. So I believe in choice. I believe that schools do better when they are tailored to meet different kinds of student needs. But the problem with some charter schools is that they don't provide transportation. They don't provide any kind of food. They don't provide support that some kids need in order to get to take advantage of that opportunity. So I want charter schools to be evaluated so that we know that they're doing well, and I want them to have accessibility so that they're truly available to all public school children.
Do you have a plan in place to make that happen if elected?
Yes. In fact, I had proposed language when I was in the state Senate and got an agreement from one of the lead senators, and then they pulled it at the end, which was very frustrating.
Funding we talked about for public schools. Let's talk funding now for law enforcement. What's the hope there when it comes to our law enforcement?
Well, I've talked to lots of chiefs of police, I've talked to lots of sheriffs. What I hear time and again is they're struggling with workforce shortages, that there are too many people leaving the profession and not enough coming in. And by the way, our data at the Department of Justice backs that up. We certify law enforcement, and for the last couple years, more officers have given in their certification than new officers have acquired them. Law enforcement is predominantly a local government function, sheriffs and police departments, and so the state can't really pay those salaries, but what the state can do, and I developed a whole plan working with chiefs and sheriffs to make it easier for local law enforcement to recruit and retain good law enforcement. Provide incentives for out-of-state officers and new officers to come in to the profession. Do a marketing campaign about how great life is here in North Carolina. We have the Criminal Justice Fellows program to get bright, public-spirited young people out of high school into training programs, basic law enforcement training, at no cost to them so that they can then serve the community.
So more money for law enforcement officers here in North Carolina.
100%. But with the state not carrying the full weight of that, but the state providing an incentive, a nudge to make it a more attractive place at local government for people to come work.
Okay, taxes for everyday citizens, whatever, cars, groceries, whatever.
Yeah, well, I certainly don't want to raise the sales tax, but I've proposed a working families tax cut, which is about cutting taxes for working families, middle-class families, so that they have more money in their pockets, that we lift more kids out of poverty, and that we stimulate local economies because those dollars get circulated one-to-one back in the local community. What I'm concerned about with the current tax scheme of the Republican General Assembly is we have the lowest corporate income tax in the country of any state that has a corporate income tax. They want to drive that from that to zero, creating a huge hole in our budget so that we're not able to pay for the school teachers and to pay for the law enforcement or to pay for our road repairs. I would much rather invest in our people and their futures and working people, middle class folks, than I would to give more tax cuts to big corporations and their shareholders who the vast majority of them live out of state.
So if I want to make sure that I'm accurate here. We want to increase funds for public education. We want to increase funds for law enforcement. We want to reduce the taxes in regards to individuals and stuff like that. So I guess the obvious question would be then, where is the money going to come from to make all of this that you're talking about happen?
Yeah, well, I want to make sure we're not further cutting the taxes for big corporations and their out-of-state shareholders. And we would be able to then cover these other investments.
So from the standpoint, let me ask this one. So obviously it's a trickle-down effect, and you probably know economics and business a little bit better than I. But if I've got an employee that works for a company, obviously we don't want to impact the individual in regards to grocery tax cuts and things like that or whatever. But if we're going to look at the company, well, if the company hypothetically employs 5,000 people, but the company's like, wait a second, you're not going to help us out. Well, we're going to move to Texas, or we're going to move to North. So how do we balance that? Because we certainly don't want to impact the individual, but if we lose the company, we've impacted the 5,000 individuals that work for the company.
Absolutely. We want North Carolina to be the best place for companies to do business. And we've been either one or two in each of the last 4 years. So we have a strong track record. And when the Republicans first talked about cutting taxes, we had the highest corporate tax rate of any state in the Southeast. And they said that it stuck out like a sore thumb. It made it harder for us to compete, to recruit businesses. And it turns out I agree with them. They were right. So they have now dropped us to the lowest in the country. So I am not worried about corporations leaving North Carolina when we are the lowest in the country of any state with a corporate income tax. So where are they going to go? There's no state with a corporate income tax that's lower.
A few last things, a couple hot button issues. The border, sanctuary cities. What say you as it relates to cities in North Carolina and all of that?
Yeah, well, immigration is a real issue, and we need to have real solutions because there are real problems that come along with illegal immigration. Obviously, that's predominantly the domain of the federal government. I've urged them to pass what had been the strongest border security bill in an entire generation, and it was negotiated between the most conservative Republican senator and Democratic senators, and it was going to be enacted into law until former President Trump told the House Republicans to kill it because he would rather campaign on the issue of immigration than solve it, which I think is disgraceful. And then where we are seeing the issue of the border here in North Carolina has to do with fentanyl. And fentanyl is killing entirely too many of our people. 9 folks a day today, 9 tomorrow, 9 yesterday. Every day it's 9 too many. And so I've been working to tackle the fentanyl problem. Just had a meeting yesterday in Wilmington, the Southeast Regional Task Force, my fentanyl task force. We have a statewide fentanyl task force. We have regional task force. It's all about getting local, state, and federal law enforcement and prosecutors around the table to identify what are the targets, how can we better prioritize who takes which part of these drug trafficking networks down to keep us safe. I worked on a bipartisan basis with the General Assembly to ban pill presses, which drug dealers use to convert fentanyl into what looks to be pharmaceuticals. We passed an anti-money laundering statute this year to give law enforcement more tools to go after drug trafficking networks. So we are taking concrete steps to raise the cost of doing business of these criminal enterprises here in North Carolina. I urged Congress to fund fentanyl scanners at the border, and I'm gratified that they finally did. It was one of the few things they did this year that was positive to make our state safer.
I'm going to get back to that, but let me just follow up with the immigration thing real quick. Sanctuary cities in North Carolina, whatever city, pick your city, Raleigh, Charlotte, Greensboro, whatever. yes, we're fine with sanctuary cities.
Yeah.
That we want to get like.
We passed a law about 10 years ago banning sanctuary cities in North Carolina. And I know this because I was in the state Senate at that time and I voted to support that law.
Let me get back to fentanyl. For people that say, look, you've been the Attorney General for quite a long time, and yet here we are, we talk about fentanyl, we talk about drug overdoses, we talk about deaths and things like that, and they're on the uptick. You're the AG, you allowed this to happen. I'm not saying that, but some will.
Yeah.
What say you about that?
Well, fortunately, we're on the down curve. We're starting to finally
Some will
see.
argue with you about that.
No, they won't. I can show you the data that shows that the number of people who are dying is less today than it was a year or 2 years ago. There are still too many people dying, don't get me wrong. But this is immensely complicated. When I came into office, the crisis was the opioid prescription pills, and we addressed that issue. We banned overprescribing by doctors. I went after the drug companies to hold them accountable, got nearly more than $50 billion. That money is now in North Carolina being invested to help people who are struggling with addiction get healthy and well. But then it became a problem of heroin. Now it's a problem of fentanyl. So things are morphing, and yes, the drug crisis is real and ongoing, but at every turn, we are doing everything we can in law enforcement to tackle this crisis. We're working also with the healthcare system so we can address the demand for these drugs by having fewer people who are addicted. I wish we could flip a switch and make it go away, but I am laser focused on doing everything we can so that there are more people alive and healthy today and tomorrow than otherwise would have been.
Two last things, and I'll let you go. Second Amendment. Explain your stance.
Yeah, well, I support the Second Amendment. People have a constitutional right to bear arms, to own a gun. But we need to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous, violent people. People who have criminal records, people who are abusing their spouse. We need to have comprehensive background checks to do that, and it frustrates me to no end that this legislature refuses to enact laws to get guns out of the hands of dangerous, violent people. We need red flag laws so that family members can petition the court to temporarily remove a gun from somebody who poses a risk to themselves or to others. So there are some basic safety measures we can take. They will not solve the problem. We won't have an end to gun deaths, but these measures are shown to reduce the number of unwanted gun deaths, and that's what we need to be about. We don't have seat belts so that there are no more deaths on our roads, but we have seat belts so that there are fewer deaths on the roads.
Biological men playing women's sports. It's become a hot button topic. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah. I've been on this campaign trail for 2 years. You're the first person who's asked me this question. So I focus on the issues that really make a huge difference in the lives of students and school teachers and administrators so that we can have the best public schools possible. Obviously, we want to have fair competition. We want people to be safe, and I'm sure we can come up with a way to do that.
How do we come up with a way though? I mean, I mean, there's a lot of schools, a lot of cities are dealing with, right? I'm sure you're aware of this issue with San Jose State right now. Volleyball player, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of teams have decided to forfeit. Even her own team has come out and said, we don't feel comfortable. If this happens at North Carolina State, UNC Chapel Hill, Duke, pick your school, UNC Greensboro.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. We have a system in place where if any child wants to petition to play, they petition the administrators of the sports, and I think it happens like once every other year.
Is it fair though?
I want to make sure that
safe?
Well, they will ensure that it is fair and it is safe.
How?
By reviewing each case file. That's how it works.
Okay. Because a lot of people will say that if we're allowing a biological man competing as a woman, playing a woman's sports, that it's unsafe.
Here's what I want to do, is make sure that every child in North Carolina has every opportunity to succeed. Literally, no person has asked me that question other than you. And what people have asked me is, why are we having trouble filling teachers at the start of the school year? Why are our kids not getting the investment in our public schools? Why are there not more school nurses, school counselors, school social workers? Why are our bus drivers woefully underpaid? I want to focus on what's going to make a real difference in the lives of North Carolina school kids, because I want every child to succeed, whether they go to college or whether they start their career.